appear that this intelligence has been passed to the US by Israel. Israel has an interest. Lots of outlets have reported, including ours, that Israel would be keen that the war in Iran was stepped up again. I don't think it's any secret that the Israelis would like to see more bombs hitting Iran. So I think there is probably a kernel of truth to the idea that the Iranians want to assassinate Donald Trump. Is there an active plot? Is there a sort of missile targeted at the White House right now? Probably not.
Donald Trump has warned Iran that the United States would completely decimate and destroy all areas of the country if he was assassinated by Tehran. This comes after Israel shared intelligence with the US about a new Iranian plot to assassinate President Trump. Hopes for a lasting peace agreement grow ever more distant. After this week, both sides resumed military strikes and Trump declared that the ceasefire deal is over. Well, Alistair Dawber is news editor for politics and national security at the Wall Street Journal, and he joins me now. Good afternoon from here. Good morning where you are, Alistair.
Hi, good morning, Jane. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Alistair. Is it just as hot as it was?
No, it's not quite as hot this week. It's a bit humid, a bit overcast, and there's a helicopter going over for some reason. But anyway, that'll go. No, got a pleasant day here in New York this morning.
Very glad to hear it, Alistair. Now, Alistair, let's start with this extraordinary story about assassination attempts. Now, are Trump's warnings against these assassination attempts merely paranoia, or were Iran seriously planning assassinations of the president?
I mean, I think you've got to take a step back on this story and have a look in the round. At the start of the war, on the 28th of February, the Iranian supreme leader was killed in an American or Israeli bomb attack on Tehran. Would the Iranians like to kill Donald Trump? I mean, I guess part of some people in the regime in Iran probably would. It would appear that this intelligence has been passed to the US by Israel. Israel has an interest. Lots of outlets have reported, including ours, that Israel would be keen that the war in Iran was stepped up again. I don't think it's any secret that the Israelis would like to see more bombs hitting Iran. So I think there is probably a kernel of truth to the idea that the Iranians want to assassinate Donald Trump. Is there an active plot? Is there a sort of missile targeted at the White House right now? Probably not. But what it doesn't help is the entire situation in the Persian Gulf. As you said in the introduction there, we've had more bombing raids by the Americans on Iran this week. We've had Iranian responses. The ceasefire that was signed last month, which led to a 60-day negotiation period to try and get to a point where a lot of the issues between the US and Iran will be settled. That is increasingly looking like it's going out the window. Quite where it goes from here, we don't know. The Americans seem to have set a deadline of today for Iran to say it won't attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz again. The Iranians, I think, are unlikely to do that. I mean, it's an open question as to where it goes from here, but it's not a good situation.
No, Alistair. I mean, obviously, when Trump came into office for the second time, he made a big point of talking about not getting involved in forever wars. But this is going on and on. It's looking exactly like one of those. I mean, you said we don't know where it goes from here. What are the options that are left for a Trump administration to try to bring things to a close?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the administration would argue vehemently here that this is not a forever war. This is a war that is over. It's now about negotiating a deal. Although Trump says the ceasefire is over, we'll see what happens. The options aren't great. They can carry on negotiating, but we've seen several times since the peace deal was signed last month that bombs have been flying, attacks have happened. The Strait of Hormuz is more open than it was during the height of the war, but it's not open to the extent that it was before February the 28th, when the war started. There is an option where America and perhaps Israel and other Gulf allies could go back to war and try and decapitate again the Iranian leadership. But we've seen that the Iranians are quite resilient. So that doesn't seem to be an option either. The third option, and we're approaching midterm elections in the US where voters don't like the idea of wars overseas, and that's why Donald Trump promised that 2 years ago. Could the Americans just walk away from the whole situation? The Strait of Hormuz is slightly open. It will push up gas prices. Are American voters used to higher gas prices now? Probably not. there are lots of options, none of them, on the face of it, particularly good for the administration here.
No. Well, you mentioned the midterm elections, Alistair, and I do want to move on to another very big story from inside the US this week, which is the implosion of Democrat Senate candidate Graham Plattner. For our listeners who perhaps haven't been following the ins and outs of this case, can you briefly summarise what happened this week to Plattner?
Well, Graham Plattner is a 41-year-old oyster farmer from the state of Maine. A very winnable seat for the Democrats in the midterms, and they would need that seat to get control of the Senate after the midterm elections. Graham Plattner's entire campaign has been dogged by some very, very serious allegations that women have made against him. He denies these allegations of sexual assault. He has been adopted by the left of the Democratic Party, which is on the rise. Some of the same people who supported Zoran Mandami in New York last year, when he won the mayoral election, got very much behind Graham Plattner's campaign. There is a question as to whether or not the digging on Plattner's background, his past behaviour was sufficient, whether the due diligence was done sufficiently well or not. But now that Graham Plattner's dropped out of the race, that happened yesterday, the Democrats have a big problem. A very winnable seat, but they seem to have taken a situation that was favourable to them and entirely messed it up. And voters, I don't think, are going to be particularly impressed by Graham Plattner, the way his campaign went, his behaviour, or in fact the way the Democratic Party seemed to adopt him without too much looking into his past behaviour.
Well, that is a problem, isn't it, for the Democrats? Because obviously they've spent a lot of time in Trump's second term and in Trump's first term, and in the last decade, sort of attacking the Republicans for the president's personal life, and now they've supported a candidate with allegations of, as you say, pretty serious allegations in his own private life, which they seem to have not really done due diligence of. Is it going to damage the Democrats beyond just Maine?
Quite possibly, and there are other candidates standing for election, or were standing for election for the Democrats, who've fallen to a similar fate in the last few months. I think it speaks to a wider problem for the Democratic Party. They can't decide where they are. There's a huge row between the moderates in the party, the old Bill Clinton wing, if you like, or the wing that Joe Biden represented, and the progressive left. The head boy for that, I guess, at the moment is someone like Zoran Mandami. There is a battle for who controls the Democratic Party, what sort of policies it sets out in office. But voters, I think, look at this, and as we see from the UK, voters don't like divided parties. They look at what's happening to the Democratic Party, and polls suggest that even though, in a midterm elections, when there's a Republican administration, they could be expected to do rather well. It looks as though they might struggle, certainly to take back the Senate and possibly even the House of Representatives in November.
Yeah, which nobody was predicting a few weeks ago. And before I have to let you go, Alistair, we have to discuss the World Cup, which of course is entering its final stages, but without the US team. Now that they're out, are Americans still as into the World Cup as they were when we talked about it last weekend?
Well, many of my colleagues are still arguing about the red card handed to the US player whose suspension was miraculously and Lazarus-like suspended. No, I think it's fair to say that once the Americans have been knocked out, the groundswell of public excitement and enthusiasm for the World Cup the air has slightly come out of that a little bit. But there's still some diehards who are sort of very much hoping that England get a kicking tonight against Norway. England probably aren't the most popular team. I try and correct them on all that, but no, it's certainly true that the sort of enthusiasm has dropped off a little bit now that the US team's out. But hopefully it will lead to sort of a more excitement about football, soccer, call it what you will, in the coming years.
Have you got somewhere with good air conditioning and a good fraternity of British brothers to watch tonight, or this afternoon, just late this afternoon for you, Alistair? And a good bar. Yeah, all those things are that's sort of most important planning of the day, Jane. That's all taken care of. I'm happy we're doing this morning rather than tomorrow morning. Me too, Alistair, me too. Great to speak to you as always, Alistair. Enjoy the game later. That was Alistair Dawber, who is news editor at the Wall Street Journal.